All right, everybody. Welcome to the Account-Based Engagement Summit. I'm Billy Bateman, co-founder of ChatFunnels, and today I have the privilege of being joined by Scott Rhodes, Associate Director at Boston Consulting Group over marketing, sales, and pricing. Scott, dude, thanks for joining me again.
Billy, it's great to see you. Always great to catch up with you.
Yeah, we love what you guys are doing at BCG, and we had you at our last summit. We talked a lot. You and Dave Elkington, great conversation about account-based engagement, what it is. That's the theme of our summit today. So we wanted to do a follow-on session with a lot of questions that we'd gotten from attendees at the last session, and hit through some of those. But before we hop into those, why don't you just introduce yourself, tell a little bit about your background. You've got a super interesting journey and background. And for anyone who didn't hear about it at the last summit, I'd love for them to hear it.
Yeah, appreciate it. Yeah, absolutely. You're right. It has been a journey. My background's pretty heavy, pretty much purely in digital marketing. We started an agency when we were in college, building websites and doing search engine marketing back before the days of Google. So not to date ourselves. Through the years, I've done a lot of work with large branding agencies doing kind of end-to-end global kind of rebranding work, again, purely in the digital space. Had the privilege to work with some brilliant people over at Razorfish, doing some incredible e-com work and website design work. But I moved on to really lead the CRM practice, which was really kind of focused in on the early marketing automation teams, right? Salesforce Marketing Cloud back before when it was still ExactTarget, Neolane before it became the Adobe Experience platform, and so on. So, and from there, I've ran been a COO of one of the largest, fastest kind of growing boutiques for Salesforce Marketing Cloud, and ran global digital platforms at Hart Hanks, where, again, really digging our feet into data. How do we help clients kind of really build proprietary data systems, intelligence platforms on top of that? And then my team was really around how do we make it actionable, right? We ran global teams for clients in both the B2B and B2C space, acting as email agency of record for brands like Bank of America, and helping clients like Microsoft and Nationwide Insurance. So it was really kind of, it's been a great, I think, foundation that has allowed, here at BCG for us to really kind of dig into both B2C and B2B clients and help them figure out how do they really accelerate their marketing operations end to end. So it's been a fun journey, and I've had the honor and privilege of working with some brilliant people throughout that time. So
yeah, I mean, you're one of the OGs of digital marketing. I was, I think, in grade school when you would have started building websites. So really happy to have you here. And then to give people a little more context on how we started this conversation, you and your team last year at BCG wrote a paper on how do you move past ABM to ABE and what that is. And our sales manager found it, and he was like, dude, I think this is what we're already trying to do, and showed it to me. I read it. I was like, dude, these guys have figured out what we're trying to figure out. And you got a lot of great things. So anyone who hasn't watched the session you did with Dave Elkington, I'd encourage them, go back. You can find it on chatfunnels.com and watch that. But we had a lot of questions coming out of that. And the biggest question that we got a lot is really, what's the fundamental difference between ABM and ABE? So I'll leave you with that and let you break it down.
Yeah, it's it's a great question, right? And it's kind of always kind of one of those things that, to be honest, when we went into the study, we kind of went into it with that perspective of ABM, right? And I think as we looked at ABM's been around, right? This is not a new thinking, new philosophy. It's been around for over 15 years, and it's in different degrees of maturity. But when you look back at how things have morphed and evolved over time, you really almost have to go back to that pre-ABM, right? Where marketing and sales, a lot of their forecasting of revenue and pipeline and opportunities was really just tracking, opportunities through that pipe, right? And so marketing had that job of fill the pipe, and that was their metric. Sales was measured based on their ability to convert it. Right. So there was that real kind of clear delineation of roles and responsibilities. You guys fill it, we'll convert it. And what you saw with ABM, really wasn't, profoundly different, but it was really kind of a move away from leads and that lead-based marketing, and trying to help marketing better focus on targeting those companies that are more likely to buy, very simply, and then again, not a profoundly big difference, but there are subtleties there. And I think a lot of that was fueled by advancements in technology, advancements in digital, more data, our better ability to model and begin to leverage that data and personalized engagements. Again, like we were talking about, back in the old days of marketing automation, the ability to leverage data and to really kind of drive more tailored personal engagement. Really kind of began to lay the foundation for some of that ABM thinking. So fast forward into our research, right? So as we dove into the research and began to dig into it, what we see today is not only the continued evolution of the technology, a continued proliferation of data, right, across the organization, but how companies were beginning to use this and better leverage this. And where we began to see this is really the ability for it to kind of really drive the entire go-to-market approach, right? So ABE kind of evolved out of this aspect of a couple of things. One, driving that kind of go-to-market strategy, really focusing and better aligning marketing, sales, services, right, to drive those highly targeted, personalized, omni-channel, account-driven engagements, right?
Yep.
If we're playing buzzword bingo, I just scored bingo. Right?
You did.
So, but what does that really mean, right? And I think what's critical about that and where we had that kind of thought was account-based marketing it had marketing in its name, right? So it had this idea of it's a marketing issue. It's a marketing challenge. Marketing owns it. And that's not the case, right? Customers, whether you're B2B or B2C, engage with brands, and brands have to drive an experience and drive engagement from end to end. And so the more that we looked at it, it really, by classifying it as a go-to-market motion from end to end, it really is about engagement. How do I better understand who those customers are? How do I better understand where they are in their journey? And how do I engage with them from an end-to-end perspective? That is a role and responsibility of marketing, sales, and service. So as we looked at it, I think where we had that kind of epiphany is that this is about account-based engagement from end to end. It's not just about marketing. So I think that's kind of how we kind of came to that kind of perspective.
Yeah. So just to sum everything up you said, and really quickly, and correct me if I'm wrong, is, with ABM, it's kind of just a marketing thing. It's really struggled to get buy-in. And I've seen that as I talk to people. Marketers will buy it, like they have a sixth sense, they have a demand base, Triblio, any number of these. Mm-hmm. The marketing team's all in, and they're like, the sales team should be in on this too, but for whatever reason, they have a disconnect. But with engagement, we're thinking entire customer life cycle, all the way through marketing to sales to servicing that customer, all the way through renewal and expansion. How are we engaging in a cohesive way across the entire organization?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the trends, absolutely, you're spot on. I think one of the trends that we're seeing in the marketplace is like you even said, like you named off a lot of tech, right? In that piece. And we always have this term in the back of our head about marketing tech stack. What's the MarTech stack?
Yeah.
What we're starting to see is that blending, right? What is your marketing and sales tech stack? How are those better integrated? How do we think about connectivity across those? So I think as that technology has expanded, what we're seeing trends with a lot of our clients is those tech stacks have to be better integrated and tied together. So now we're looking at it as engagement stacks or marketing and sales tech stacks to improve that handoff and handshake, accelerate SLAs, and improve the visibility, the data flow between them, right?
Yeah.
So, that's one kind of big thing. I think the other thing that we see too is the pivot of marketing's role, right? As we talked in the beginning, marketing's role started off with cramming it in top, fill me, give me a number, how many MQLs, right? We still see that. We're still breaking that bad behavior, that muscle memory, right? Anybody that learned how to play golf incorrectly and then tries to fix it over time, you're breaking all that bad muscle memory. And we still work with clients that still operate in a KPI of number of leads. And it's not, and so that what we're starting to see is breaking that muscle memory. And in doing that, marketing's role is extending. Marketing is not just filling the top of the funnel. They're thinking about middle funnel. They're thinking of bottom of funnel. It's about sales enablement, right? How can sales drive the conversation when they're in sales, but how can marketing stay engaged? A lot of big tech companies have long sales cycles, complex buying committees. And so marketing, it's critical for them to have that always on motion, stay engaged during that sales cycle, and better support and enable sales. And then on this backside, what you're seeing a large, and I think this was accelerated tremendously during COVID, but companies saying, okay, how do I shore up my existing clients, right? How do I expand my share of wallet? How do I increase my footprint? How do I think about renewals? How do I think about expansion motions? And marketing has to play a critical role in that. So what you really see is those two things, that trends that we're seeing in the marketplace is one, that tech stack combining, and then marketing's role really extending into that. And I think those both things are kind of kind of tailwinds, if you will, for the idea of account-based engagement and how can marketing stay engaged and think about their clients in more of a holistic way.
I love it. So is that, I want to dig in on that. You're starting to lead into what causes ABM on its own just to fail. What are the things that you guys found that cause those programs to fail?
Yeah, that's a great question. We hit on the tailwinds of it, right? So some of those headwinds, that we've seen with a lot of our clients and that we found throughout the research is, most of the time, I think what we found is really about 50% of the time within the first year, we look at ABE in a couple different ways, right? Because as you break down your customer segments, and this is kind of important, is there's strategic ABE, which we look at like your tier 1 accounts. These are your top 100 named accounts, top 50 named accounts. Those accounts that I'm going to drive strategic one-to-one conversations that has higher resource costs, higher acquisition costs. So I have to be very focused about that. So that's an important thing to understand. Then there's scaled ABE, which is really that, okay, what are my next 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 accounts? Not my total addressable market. These are typically named accounts or key vertical components. But what you have to do at that scale, right, is increase your level of automation, increase the scalability of marketing, right? So, and then you have kind of your kind of more addressable market below that. So that's, as we look at that, I think it's critical. And that slide that you had up there shows that within both strategic and scaled ABE, 50% of the time, clients, that headwind came from that lack of alignment between marketing and sales, right? How do we better kind of make sure that we are philosophically aligned about our go-to-market for ABE, how we define it, and how do we really kind of create that alignment between marketing and sales and create cross-functional groups, right? So to where those strategic accounts, when marketing and sales, we agree on who they are, how we're going to measure them as they come into the funnel, what those handoffs look like, and really the aligning of those marketing and sales go-to-market motions and handoffs is a critical component. And so as you see here, you see 55% of strategic accounts failed in the first year, and typically around that. Other aspects were, data challenges. Tell me one client you've ever met that says, my data is perfect, right? We've got great data. It's perfect. We're able to glean intelligence out of it that we can take action on, right? It's always a challenge. And so that's always a big piece, and as you move down, you can see the points on here around kind of more senior and executive support, and insufficient kind of technology tools, capabilities, right?
Yeah.
And the same aspect is we saw within the scaled ABE. But what's great about this too is stick with it. This is another thing is no one gets it right the first time, whether it's ABE or go back to the golf game. No one just picks up a club and just comes out and just, starts hitting, birdies. So as we saw clients move it past that first year of those growing pains, you see a tremendous increase in success rate, 63% on the strategic and almost 75% as we move into scaled past that first year. So, the challenges aren't anything different than I think we see anytime you're trying to break those kind of operational, kind of cross-functional ways of working, system and tools. That enablement is really the alignment, getting it working together, functioning correctly, and do they have the right system, tools, and data? And that just takes a while to scale up.
Yeah. So how do you really foster that alignment? Is it leadership? Is it tools? Is it that, a combination of, I'm sure there's no one thing, but what did you guys see as the driving factors in getting the alignment, everybody on board, marketing, sales, service, with this strategy?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think that, where we see it is we kind of, one, you have to work with that senior leadership and kind of, at the executive board level, and begin to say, is there philosophical alignment at that highest level, right? Is there commitment by the executive team, between the sales team, the SDRs and the pre-sales, inside sales and field teams, and the marketing group, to commit to, like, this is how we believe in this, right? Do we see a need to fundamentally pivot the way that we go to market? And do we do this around thinking about our accounts? Right? You have to want to change, right? So getting that philosophical alignment, I think, is step one. And then we begin to look at operational alignment, right? Which is, how is a sausage made, right? How do we get it done? And so at that level, we start kind of thinking through what's our, how are we going to begin to tackle this from a data, from a modeling. How are we going to begin to think about it from a go-to-market motions? Who does what? Do we have the right centers of excellence? Do we have the right ways of working, right? What tools and systems do we have today? And what can we do within the confinements of our current operational capabilities? So that second tier is really thinking through the operational alignment of just how we're going to build the initial pilots, take this to market, and then scale over time. The last aspect of it is really around measurement, right? How we're going to measure success. And so that is going back to our opening conversation, breaking that muscle memory of MQLs, right?
Yeah.
And we agree philosophically and strategically how we're going to do what we want to do. We operationally know and align on how we're going to do this. Now, how are we going to measure success, right? Is critical. And because how you approach this, is typically we're starting with pilots, and so ABE can begin in a very focused way. We may tackle top of funnel. We align on our strategic accounts. We tackle the top of funnel and then move into kind of mid, bottom of funnel and move things through sales. So each one of these stages of acquisition and sales acceleration have different key KPIs. And so we have to rethink how we measure success. And that has to go, again, all the way up to the board. Because if you have a CEO that's still pressing the CMO saying, how many MQLs did you generate?
Yeah.
And that measurement aspect is off, then the muscle memory will return and you'll go back to those bad habits. So
for sure.
So it's really those kind of three stratospheres, if you will, kind of thinking about it from a philosophical, operational, and measurement kind of alignment.
Yeah. And, one thing, people are going to operate however they're compensated, So if you've got a demand gen leader who's compensated on MQLs, like just a raw number of MQLs, and then you're like, hey, I want to do this ABE, I don't think you're ever gonna get there. So small companies, I think they're already doing ABE without really calling it ABE or thinking about it. Every startup or small organization I've worked in, every account matters, So you may be pulling in customer support, you're pulling in sales, marketing, whenever you've got a significant opportunity to get it done and to make sure they stay happy and they retain. It's hard to keep that up.
You hit on a great point. And there's a colleague of mine, Matt Ward, who preaches this all the time from the sales side, is the idea of incentives, right? Yep. Even on the sales side is people will always, guide their behavior based on those incentives, and being able to kind of right size not only how your measurement of the programs, but measurement of the employees, incentivize the employees has to be rethought in order to align and encourage that behavior. It's a great point.
What kind of, I think this isn't really addressed in the article the guys wrote, but what kind of incentives do you put in front of marketing and sales to align them? Is it just total revenue retained, gained? I'm just thinking off the top of my head here, but if we're just going, these standard metrics we've been judged off of, which you should track. I don't think anyone should go away from tracking those things,
right?
But probably just not incentivize off of what we have been incentivizing people off of.
Yeah, no. So on that measurement kind of alignment, right? And to your question of kind of around marketing, and it's definitely, I think when we go into and work with clients, there's usually different, layers and spans within an organization, and different layers are going to look at different, different metrics. At an executive and board level, they need to be able to understand business outcomes, right? Is really kind of where we're looking at it at that level. What's my lifetime value? We tend to deal with a lot of technology companies. This metric's kind of rooted in technology, but when you look at an LTV over CAC or a lifetime value over cost to acquire customer, gives you a magic number. And so, at an executive level, they're going to be looking at what's my lifetime value, thinking through, the year-over-year growth of those accounts, with considering churn, how much are we cost to acquire each customer. They'll look at growth expansions in specific geos or for specific business units, tied back to a revenue number. So we will begin to at that level and say, here's the metrics at that board level. The next kind of tier down, as you look at it, is a lot of head of marketing, head of sales, where they're going to be heavily looked at. Okay, I need to hit these revenue numbers, right, tied to these business outcomes. In order to do that, what are my pipeline metrics, right? And so this is where we kind of begin to break down and think through. Within that pipeline, we have tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 segmented accounts. Within that, we have so many new logos and expansion revenue in order to achieve that. So we really kind of break down the pipeline as that acquisition, sales enablement, and sales acceleration and extension motions. And then within that, you look at and align kind of critical KPIs, right? It's no longer about, hey, how's my ad unit driving web traffic? But what's my web traffic look like against those tiers, right? What's my penetration against my tier 1 accounts versus tier 2 and tier 3? We'll look at, traffic to hand raising conversion rates, hand raising to a nurture to an opportunity stages. And then we kind of break it down, right? So now we kind of break that pipeline down to a customer journey, and we really align metrics to that. Not only number of MQLs, but let's think about velocity metrics, right? How quickly is someone moving through that pipeline? We look at value metrics from my cost components throughout each stage, as well as my revenue components tied to contract value, right? Efficiency numbers, like how efficiently is my marketing and engagement, the effectiveness of that to drive engagement, right? So aligning and breaking the metrics down across like what we look at as core value, volume, velocity, efficiency, effectiveness metrics at each one of those stages and across each one of those tiers gives marketing more of a microscope on what's working, what's not working, how do I optimize? And so that optimization then comes down into the final tier, which is your campaign level, right? And so your campaigns are designing to accelerate each one of those gates of that funnel, right? How do I accelerate my targeting in my paid media? It's very, very top of funnel. How do I accelerate the content and the engagement? My chat funnel does a great job of solving that problem of unknown to known. Yeah. Right. Once I get onto the site, how quickly can I engage with that audience, collect enough information for them to where I can then identify who they are? Now I can model them and say, is this a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3? Now I know what the next best action is. Do I accelerate you to an account rep? Do I push you through product information? Do I give you a case study based on my conversation with you, right? It's all about engagement at that point. And so those campaign level metrics are really those designed to be that fine-tune element of how do I accelerate that engagement through that pipeline to achieve my pipeline metrics, to achieve my business outcome.
Awesome, man. I love it. I love it. So, man, we only have so much time, but I do want to hit on building segments, something marketers have been doing forever. How do I break people up into different groups? But one of the key things you guys addressed is you've got to build out segments to do this in a scaled manner. Mm-hmm. What are some of just the principles that you think people should be following as they start building out these ABE segments and shift towards this? Is it different than their ABM segments? Can they just take those and slam them in, or do they need to be thinking about different attributes and factors when building these?
Yeah, that's a great point. Is, I think that, every great house is built on a solid foundation, and the foundation of kind of account-based engagement and account-based marketing lies on that segmentation, right? Because as we said with the account-based engagement modeling, it's really, how do I design my go-to-market around these segments? So, as we look at kind of building kind of a good foundation of those segments, is, starting with that total addressable market as our pool, right? And then within that total addressable market, let's whittle this down and say, okay, what are those, as I said before, what's that tier 1, tier 2, tier 3? The idea of a segment is really kind of this very simple, it's a fit model, right? How can I identify you, right? And that model is based off of, what do my best customers look like? So let's start with your data, right? Start with your contract data. Deals won, lost, look at stage 1 opportunities, look at one loss, look at contract size, share of wallet, churn, sales cycles, and begin to try to look for patterns in there, right? And say, these have a higher contract value, they have accelerated sales cycles, and have a lower degree of churn. That kind of gives you a kind of perspective around that. So it gives you kind of more of that kind of customer view. Backing out of that, we have to, again, our goal is to be able to identify, right? How do I identify these? So let's look at firmographic information. Look for patterns across the industry, geo, company size, employee counts, revenues. This will tend to not only give you an idea of what these companies kind of look like from a firmographic size, it'll also you'll see correlation here around sales complexity, right? Very large enterprise versus kind of smaller, medium-sized companies tend to have smaller buyer committees, accelerated sales cycles, and that can help really drive a tailored go-to-market. Layering into that is kind of technographic information, what kind of systems do they have, things like this, that the technologies, like what are those characteristics, that can, again, about that company that can help you say, okay, this is a good customer. And so those are kind of like, those are like the base of a soup, right? The carrots, the lettuce, the celery, the onions. It's just the base. I think you can expand on that modeling as you mature with enriching it with third-party data sources. You can begin to layer in behavioral data around engagements, which type of companies tend to engage in different ways, and more. And so that can help us kind of, again, fine-tune that model. But so I think it's really important. That's a really data-driven approach to the model, which is critical for a model, right? But at the same time, I always balance quant versus quality, right? And I think this is an important piece that we see with a lot of companies and a lot of clients is they're so data-driven that they forget to have a conversation. And the conversation is that conversation between sales and marketing. And that conversation has to be, hey, guys, does this make sense? Right? Sales guys, here's what we're seeing. Is this our top 50 accounts that we see that makes sense to go after this next year? Yes, that makes sense. No, this one does, this doesn't. Make sure we have that alignment, right? And so that conversation in alignment between marketing and sales is that critical component, because this is why it fails, right? Is make sure that everybody's on board with how we are going to define our best customers and who fits within those stratospheres. So
awesome. I love it. So as we make the shift from ABM to ABE, what are the biggest challenges, 2 or 3, that you see people struggling with as they make that shift? Is it the alignment? Is it just thinking a little bit differently? What are you guys seeing?
Yeah, it's what we tend to see is again, I think when I look at it from my perspective, if you're already kind of doing ABM, right, then you probably have some foundation. You've got your feet under you, right? You might be in a pilot motion, right? So you may be testing this with a handful of accounts in a specific geo. Or you may be tackling it from a handful of accounts in a specific portion of the funnel, right? So the question then becomes is how do I scale this, right? How do I think through my operational aspects of it and grow it and scale it? So that pivot to really kind of ABE is really kind of more around how am I moving this from full end to end? Yeah. So we kind of come in and kind of look at where they are, where are they at in their maturity, what's working, what's not, right? But short point of that is like, do we have good executive support, right? Do we have alignment and executive support across the functions? Or are we doing this a pilot just in marketing? So we need to create alignment with sales and kind of begin to align some of that. Is it ABE by committee? Right? Do you have an owner? Does somebody in that team kind of, whether it's a scrum lead or they're starting to create more operational kind of organizational structure around it? Is there an owner in there that really owns the entire kind of go-to-market around this? This is always a big one is, you obviously want to look at and say, okay, how are we looking at modeling? Do we have our foundation built? But a lot of it comes back to also ways of working. Do we have the right cross-functional teams? How do I scale that cross-functional teams, right? How do I begin to move further down the funnel or scale this across different business units? And so a lot of that comes with, do we have how are we working? Are we working in an agile way? Do we have the right team members to be actionable? Are we running test and learn, strategies within each stage of that funnel, or I'm hyperly focused on driving hand raisers or moving them to a trial, right? Yep. How can I optimize that continuously? So, and then I think a component that flows all the way across that is, are we hobbling along with not all the right enablements? Are we still running data and moving data manually? Do we have the right systems? Are the systems connected? So that's often a big piece when you think about moving from a pilot to kind of scale, is starting to make that investment and building proficiency in a lot of those enablement aspects of it. So,
okay.
Yeah.
I like it. So I got one last question for you.
Okay.
One of the things that we heard was, big enterprise, they got a lot of resources. Seems like this is something like they could go after fairly easily if they wanted to. But for small, medium-sized businesses, how should they start thinking this way and starting implementing it when resources are a little more scarce?
Yeah, right. When you're a marketing team of one, right?
Yeah.
And and so we do work with a lot of small kind of, especially in our pipe with our private equity teams. We work with a lot of startups, and in that stage, there is often a marketing team of one, right? So how can they kind of begin to tackle that? We work with and advise them on that all the time. And, I think that it's not any different. It's really around, I think embracing that, the scientific kind of philosophy, right? And aspects of let's start small. Let's be focused and let's hone in on the problem statement, right? And fall in love with the problem. Don't fall in love with the solution, fall in love with that problem and dig into that problem and say, okay, well, how are we going to change this? Build your hypotheses against that. And then begin to test solutions, test approaches, right? So starting small, thinking about just a handful of accounts that can really, change the trajectory of your company. And then focus on a portion of the funnel of those accounts and say, okay, we need to start at top of funnel, middle funnel. How do we identify them? how do we target them? How do we create that initial stage of engagement and build some muscle memory there, build some success there? As we build engagement, we start moving down funnel. Okay, now how am I going to build a sales-led motion on these really small accounts, right?
Yeah.
And then as you get through that process, step back. What worked? What didn't work? How would we change this? What's replicable? What's scalable, right? And that really kind of helps. I think a lot of small companies kind of really take advantage of what their strength is too, right? It's easy to look at, the grass is always greener on that other side, right? Oh, but they've got a marketing team of 500 people. Do you know the bureaucratic just sludge that's involved with that as well? You're small, you're nimble. You have so much span and control in what you can do and the decisions that you make and the impacts that those have. So embracing the agility that you have in a smaller organization is just a way of looking at it. And it has tremendous real world impact to really kind of dive in and be nimble and really drive the change rather than being tied up in complex systems and handoffs and reviews and things like that tend to bog down a lot of the larger companies when they begin to tackle this.
Yeah, the advantage I think any small company has when they're trying to do this is, like, if I'm the marketing leader, often talking to the sales leader or the sales rep is a 20-foot walk from where I sit, and then another 15 to the customer service leader, and you can just grab them and say, even if you just got 5 accounts, you're like, hey, this month or this quarter, these are our 5 besides just the normal demand gen flow that we're going to really try to go after and work those. And if you get 1 or 2 of those, it's probably a huge win for you.
Right. Absolutely. And that's one of the things that, no matter the client size, is have the kind of strategic goal of fund the journey always in the back of your mind, right? Yep. If I have that, if I'm targeting these 5, I need to win 2. That's going to generate enough of the revenue to support the next phase of this. And so how can I self-fund my own journey in this? Yeah. And again, there's not an organization, small or large, that doesn't want to take that same approach of how do I fund this journey?
Awesome, Scott. Thank you so much. It's been amazing. If you guys want to find more information on this, go to bcg.com. They've got a couple different articles on this. Scott, if anyone wants to reach out to you and continue the conversation, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
Yeah, that's great. Always feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Absolutely. Always open to that. We'll always accept that. And if you have any questions whatsoever, it's a universal doorway that's pretty accessible for all of us. That would be great. I would look forward to any conversations with anyone. I enjoy this topic very much. Yeah. And thank you, Billy. I really appreciate the invitation. Like I said, it's always great to see you. It's always great to engage. So I'm humbled by the invitation.
Yeah, thank you, man. We're grateful to have you, and it's always awesome to learn from you, Scott. So with that, everyone, enjoy the rest of the summit. We got sessions all day, and it should be great.